Hoover Commission hearing, excuse me, Little Hoover Commission hearing on electricity costs, part 3. Good morning. My name is Pedro Nava. I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Commissioners that will be present for this hearing, Vice Chair Cannella, Commissioners Dion Aroner, David Byer, Janice Sidley, Gil Garcetti, Jose Atilio Hernandez, and Gail Miller. Also with us today are members of the Commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Project Managers Crystal Beckham and Daniel Harris McCoy, and Analyst Shara McAllister. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping. We're live streaming today's hearing on Zoom, and we'll have public comment session at the end of the hearing. The commissioners' audio and video will remain on throughout the hearing. You may mute yourselves if you wish. The video and audio of this hearing, of our hearing witnesses, will be turned on when it is their turn to present. Members of the public joining us online are muted during the hearing. If you want to make a public comment, please use your raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our comment queue. Those joining by phone can dial #9 to raise their hand or email us at our email address. Please include the phone number you're using to join the meeting so staff can identify and unmute you. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and comment requests throughout the hearing. If you're present at our in-person location and would like to make a comment, please notify one of our staff members. As usual, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording this hearing. Afterwards, a permanent link to the video will be posted on our website and uploaded to our YouTube channel. And now to the substance of today's hearing. And I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment to remind the public that the material supporting the hearing is on our website. And I once again want to compliment staff on the nature of the work that was done. I think for members of the public who access those reports and our draft documents, it really does provide a pretty thorough primer of the topics that we're discussing. And so if you want to learn probably more than you ever cared to about utilities, take a look at some of the material on the website. This is the third in a series of commission hearings examining the rising cost of electricity in California. At our first hearing in February, we heard from academics and public advocates about the scale of the problem and why California's electricity rates are nearly twice the national average. In March, we heard from representatives of the solar industry, environmental organizations, and environmental justice groups about California's commitment to clean energy and the impact of energy costs and policy on marginalized communities. Today, we turn our attention to California's energy providers. We'll hear from representatives of investor-owned utilities, municipal utilities, and community choice aggregators, each of which plays a major role in delivering electricity to Californians. These witnesses will help us understand the on-the-ground realities of providing reliable and affordable energy, while also navigating the state's ambitious climate goals, wildfire threats, and changing rate structures. As a commission, we are especially interested in how these different utility models manage cost, balance infrastructure investment with customer affordability, and approach issues like transparency, equity, and accountability. Next month, we'll hold a final hearing to get input from the state's energy oversight agencies, including the California Public Utilities Commission, the Public Advocates Office, and the California Energy Commission. I want to thank Vice Chair Cannella and Commissioner Hernandez for their leadership on this subcommittee. Now, before we start, I do want to caution, or actually not necessarily caution, but let the witnesses know that if you complete your presentation, it'll probably be the first time in the history of the commission. It is customary for commissioners who have read the material and done some work on their own with respect to information on the subject to be really very eager to ask you questions. So as witnesses, you are likely to find that you are going to be interrupted. I would ask you to please take that as a compliment because it reflects the level of interest that the commissioners have on this subject. So this hearing was organized by Project Manager Daniel Harris McCoy, and I'll invite you, please, sir, to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Chair Nava. Adam Smith is Director of Regulatory Relations at Southern California Edison, where he has worked for 12 years in roles spanning climate policy, legislative affairs, and regulatory relations. Before SCE, he held environment-related positions at the United Nations, Pew Charitable Trusts, and UC Berkeley. He holds an MS in Environmental Policy from Oxford University and BA degrees in English and Environmental Policy from UC Berkeley. Mr. Smith, you may begin your testimony.
Great. Are you able to pick me up, Dan?
Sounds good.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. So yeah, Adam Smith with Southern California Edison. Appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you guys about this important topic today. As you know, Southern California Edison serves electricity to the majority of the bottom half of our state. But this is maybe a less known statistic, around a quarter of our customers are on CARE, which is the discounted low income rate. So we deeply appreciate your attention to affordability and appreciate the chance to get in here and talk to you about our perspectives on it and some solutions. So first, just a little bit, and I've coordinated some of my testimony with PG&E, who's coming next. And so I'm kind of going to go a little more high level. Shilpa is going to dive into some of the detailed proposals which we have. But to start, just a little bit about our business. The IOUs work, that's the investor-owned utilities, work to deliver on public policy goals. We are really like an original form of a public-private partnership. There's a saying you'll hear about, and we'll probably come back together, in questions, and you hear about it bantered around, this idea of the regulatory compact. There's a compact between the regulated utilities, us, and the state. That compact, in its basic form, is a list of obligations that the investor-owned utilities have to fulfill. We have an obligation to serve, no matter where you are. You can be out, in high fire risk areas. You can be down in the middle of Port Long Beach. We've got to serve you. We have an obligation to submit our capital plans to our core regulators, which they interrogate with other interveners, look at. They decide what's right, what's in the public interest. And then once they approve what we have proposed, or they make adjustments to it, we have an obligation to go out to the capital markets and bring private capital to bear on the public interest. And so with that set of obligations in this regulatory compact, there is an opportunity to earn a fair rate of return determined by our commission. So that's the regulatory compact we're going to hear a lot about. And I think it's important to these discussions to affordability, which I'll get to in just a minute. So that's kind of the core business we're operating in. And second, as we're thinking about affordability, one of the main points I'd like to impress upon this body is that we're thinking about affordability in an era of rapid climate transition. We are trying to electrify more and more end uses in the state of California, driven by public policy. So when we're thinking about affordability, it is absolutely right to focus on the electric bill, and we're going to talk about that. We think it also needs to be positioned, and there's good legislation passed on this recently, to think about the total energy share of wallet. If you are an average household, how much of your total income is going to energy sources of all kinds: electricity, natural gas, and gasoline? And why that's important is because over time, as our state policies drive us towards more electrification or maybe less emission-intensive fuel choices, the idea would be that while maybe the electricity bill might get larger, your share of wallet towards electricity might increase, your total share of energy, maybe you're buying less gasoline, buying less natural gas. And so that total picture is an also important framing device. And we're happy to hear that the Public Utilities Commission will now be reporting on that going forward based upon some recent good legislation. So that is to say, I'm not going to, a core piece of that total energy share of wallet is electricity. And we understand completely that there's a serious focus on that. Two things I'd suggest there. Number one is that there are definitely those things internal to utility operations that we can do to control costs. And we are firm believers in trying to include affordability, operational excellence, efficiency, and all the investments and activities we undertake. That's one side. That's the internal side, which I'm happy to talk about, and talk about some initiatives on that front. There's also the external stuff, the sort of that's outside of the core reasonable control of the utilities. Things like public policy decisions, which drive investment in different categories of spend. Things like wildfire risk, if they focus on safety. These are things that, these things might live outside of the core fully, responsibility of the utility, but we have to react to them. We have to invest in them to ensure the safety and reliability of our systems. So as we're walking through this, I think those are two kind of lenses to view it. There's this things that are kind of core locus of control inside the investor-owned utilities, and externally focused activities that need, externally focused drivers that need to be addressed by the utilities to safely provide reliable service. And so, in addition to kind of, the sort of internal, external, of course, we've been looking at public policy because, as we know, as a highly regulated utility, most of what we do or not do is driven by public policy, whether regulation or legislation. And I think my colleague from PG&E is going to dip a little further into the drivers of what's been driving those rate increases over time. But I just want to get you the facts on Edison's go-forward rate trajectory. Because as we've heard, rates have increased, bills have increased, but we're at a point now where we're starting to see some leveling off in our rate trajectory in the years ahead. So if I'm looking out from now until about 2028, what we see is a leveling off of about a 2.6% annual rate increase from now until 2028, which is tracking with what we would consider local inflation in the Southern California region. This is a change. We've been watching rates, significant, if everyone talks about the kink in the hockey stick, we're arriving at a point where many of those strong investments that are absolutely needed in things like wildfire, and PG&E is going to get to this, we're starting to come to the end of those. Some of the historic costs of wildfire and the rest are starting to come back out of rates, and we're starting to see a leveling off again. And so, final point here before we turn it over to PG&E and any other questions that folks might have is I just want to highlight the connection between our business. Hey, Gil, would you like to hop in?
You go ahead and finish.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll go quick then. So the idea here is, because we are such a capital intensive industry, we have to access capital. There's a really important connection between utility financial health, our credit ratings, and overall costs to customers. And so we have to go out and get that capital, like I talked about, from the private markets, bring it to bear on public benefit. But rating agencies and investors, they gauge the risk of giving us their money to put towards these public purposes. And when they're doing that analysis, if you're a rating agency or investor, the regulatory environment, the legislative environment, the respect for or the continuation of that regulatory compact I was talking about is really, really critical to their calculation of the risk of giving us their dollars. Some of the rating agencies, it's half of what they look at. And so if the regulatory legislative environment is riskier, or even if they just deem it to be, the regulatory compact is maybe getting undermined, our credit ratings can drop. SCE right now is on negative watch. That means we may see a downward move in our credit rating over the next 6 months. The other IOUs, they could talk about themselves similarly kind of positioned, this sort of negative outlook. When our credit ratings drop, this is the connection, this is the through line, our cost to borrow increases. And because we have to borrow so much every year, those costs of borrowing get passed. It's just like if you have your FICO score goes down and you need to get a mortgage, you're going to have to pay more to access that capital. And that's exactly what we see. So when you hear IOUs, we're talking about ideas. What we're trying to navigate through, and my colleague from PG is going to lay these out, are ideas that can deliver really significant affordability savings. So the ideas we're going to raise could save billions if done right. But we're trying to stay away and navigate from some ideas that we've heard that could potentially start undermining the regulatory compact, erode, maybe kind of increase the risk of investment in the state, because we know just how much money we need to bring to bear to get this grid ready for climate neutrality. So that's it. I'll stop. Appreciate the opportunity to share some of these thoughts and look forward to the questions.
Thank you. We've got Commissioner Garcetti, followed by Cannella, and then Beyer.
Thank you. And thank you, Adam, for coming forth. I read your resume. It's a very impressive resume, and your experience is also quite impressive. Since your focus is really the legislative affairs, state public policy, and regulatory relations, what is the most difficult part of your job?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think part of it is explaining the connections that we just talked through. It's difficult. I think people on the natural will say, why is this idea for saving money better than this idea? And just reminding people about the kind of way the business works, how we need to raise so much capital to bear on public priorities, that that tends to be the part that just takes a little time because, so many people are used to just regular businesses. It's, hey, if it's risky there, an airline won't fly there anymore. If there's storm, but if there's a customer out there in a high fire risk area, we have an obligation to serve them. We have to do it. By the way, we love it. We love our customers. We love doing this stuff. But I think that's one of the things. There's just nuances about the business because it's so regulated. Sometimes I feel like we're more like a state agency than we are a private business. But that's, I think, part of the difficulty part's explained, maybe, I think, to the broader public. Yeah.
Right. Second question, if I might. I'm assuming you agree with our staff report, and I'm going to quote this, that informs us, the commissioners, that regulating California utilities is not just complex, it is expensive, technical, difficult to navigate even for experts. And then they add this, regulatory proceedings are often opaque, filings are lengthy and dense, and oversight bodies may not have the resources to provide adequate scrutiny. What ideas have you either put forth in the past or want to put forth that address this particular issue?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's no way around it. It's a complex business, and we put forth plans that have to achieve a number of goals: wildfire resilience, build the grid out for the future. Like there's a lot going on. I think one of the things baked into the process that I think California can feel very proud about is the fact that, number one, we have a PUC that has very good technical staff, and they have administrative law judges that are deeply entrenched in the issues. Like, do they get it all right? In my mind, no. I'm sure they feel, I got it wrong too. That's okay. But I think one of the core additions to that is it's not just the state agency and their expertise we're relying on. The fact that we have a broad set of intervener public process that other voices, whether the ratepayer advocates and the state's ratepayer advocate, CalPA, can lobby and suggest what they'd like to see the outcome be. They can oppose our plans. They can propose alternatives. That robust public process, I think, at the end of the day, helps wrangle around these really technical issues. I think one of the things that we try to do, and I still think we can always improve on, is make our filings more accessible to the public. Just the sense of plain English up front. How much, why, what are we doing here? I do think that that's an important piece that I know we are really trying to continue to focus on. But we got to balance that, as you can imagine, right? We've got to satisfy real, obligations to satisfy the legal reasoning of the commission as to why this is justified. That language gets complex, but can we also do a good job of summarizing why and how and what up top? I think we could do better there too.
Right. Thank you, Adam.
Yep.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cannella, followed by Beyer and then Hernandez.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. So I've been doing some research preparing for this meeting. And I guess I don't understand how the IOUs are so much more expensive than the POUs. I mean, it's almost 50% higher than the publicly owned utilities. I have TID, Turlock Irrigation District, so the IOUs are twice as expensive. And honestly, in my area, we do have PG&E, and I like PG&E, they're great. But man, when someone says they're in the PG&E kind of service sector, we just like, oh man, wow. So why is it so much more expensive? I know you have some wildfire stuff, but boy, it just I can't imagine. I just don't understand why it's so much more expensive than the other providers.
Yeah, I think it probably, it's dependent, right? So there's maybe what's the difference between SCE and LADWP and PG&E and Turlock. Like, so there's probably some differences there in what people have to invest in. For instance, one of the good ones is SMUD, and I love and Derek Dolfie's here, longtime colleagues. I love some of my POU colleagues, but it's also, they have not had to, as you alluded to, invest in wildfire mitigation at the same levels that we have, for instance. We are required by law to put forth wildfire mitigation plans to address those threats. They, I think maybe benefit in that sense from serving more urban communities that are less out in the high fire risk areas. We've got to harden those areas. That's a core driver. One of the other ones is we do have policies that I think PG&E can get to in a bit here, like net energy metering, which create cost shifts between solar adopters and non-solar adopters that are in the billions of dollars a year. There's public policy choices that go in there too. But I'll tell you, I think when we look at, us, but kind of between us and LADWP, I could just at least speak for our side, and I welcome PG&E to jump in if they'd like to talk about theirs. Is we view those kind of areas core within utility control, how much we spend per mile, imagine almost per line mile served for transmission and distribution compared to our muni counterparts, that we are highly competitive and if not beating them in a few zones. And there's things outside of our control, like some of these public policy decisions, like I talked about, that only are applicable to investor-owned utilities, or maybe the wildfire, which is uniquely positioned to us. But I think that those are kind of the main things like NEM, things like wildfire, and a little dependent between which.
So there's a concept that was brought up in the report about securitization versus capital outlay.
Yeah.
And you get a return on equity of 10% versus selling bonds. Why haven't we used the securitization method more when it would save ratepayers so much more money?
Yeah, so we are seeking to securitize costs right now before the commission. This is not ex parte. I don't think there's any commissioners, but we do utilize it as a tool. It's an effective tool for the right instances. But what we also, if you think about, we've got to get dollars into the door here. We can leverage. We all have a capital structure, so we have debt we will issue, and then we will use equity up and above that for capital investments. The idea, looking to sort of something like all debt financing, it just gets really expensive. And again, we get into these credit rating agency concerns. If you're entirely engaged, leveraged up with 30-year mortgage bonds, basically on everything you're doing, you could get into a really precarious financial position. The rating agencies in the investment world want to see us have a healthy capital structure where equity is a part of that. And so the idea is absolutely yes. If you think about the cost of debt versus the rate of return that investors might see on equity, I think the general idea there is you need to offer investors of equity more because it's a less secured form of investment. And can I just do one thing on those? Because I think some people talk about the investors. If you look at our stock price, just taking a step back, our stock price 5 years ago, back in the 2020 years, and our stock price today, it's gone up, it's come back down. We are not operating in a zero risk environment from an investor's perspective. So we need to offer them a return. We don't have a way to force them. This is where maybe local governments might be different. They can tax ratepayers to bring the dollars in if they need to bring additional dollars into the utility. We have to coax it out. And that's a global marketplace for capital that we're competing in. So we have to offer a return that is fair, but also attractive enough to get those dollars here instead of having them go to Nevada or China or some other place. I think that's one of the core things. So I'd say it's a tool in the toolbox to answer your question directly, but it's a tool that we can't overuse. Otherwise, we run into some of those credit rating agency problems I think we're talking about.
Okay, the consumer advocates would say you're using that and you're gold plating the system so that you get that higher return. How would you respond to that?
Yeah. Okay. So I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think maybe the way I would address it is to talk about, because the capital structure, the PUC knows, the PUC is very aware and oversees our capital structure. So they know that there is this, I think it's a longstanding understanding of the incentives related to hey, if you have a higher return, are you going to kind of focus more on capital? This is the question I think you're getting to. Versus if you had a lower return, would you do less of this stuff? Baked into the system are checks to ensure that doesn't get out of whack. And so number one, it occurs in our general rate case where they look at all, this is how many miles of line I got to do, how many poles I got to put up. And they go, how about non-wire alternatives? How about other options? They're baking in from the beginning, I think, alternatives that wouldn't be capital focused. That happens at the macro level. So it's really a PUC oversight thing. And it even happens at the project specific level. Where if you think that a large capital project that we're laying out there, other interveners, whether it's through the certificate of public convenience and necessity process that the PUC does, when they determine, do that or do something different, they're talking about alternatives there, including non-wire, non-capital. Can you do microgrids? Can you do these other things? So I think maybe a way to say it is that is part of the incentive structure. We have to offer a return to attract the capital. How the PUC, our core regulator, understands that. We understand that. So when we put forth ideas, they're always interrogated through that lens, whether at the high programmatic level, this is your investment plan, or even at the project specific level for a lot of the large projects.
Okay,
So
my
I
last
guess-
question
Yeah.
is, when Senator Bradford initially wanted us to look at that, I think his desire was, can we lower rates? And it sounds like you're saying no. So is there any ideas on how we can lower rates, or is it just, it is what it is, but it's going to not grow as much in the future?
No. Totally ideas. I apologize. We're trying to divide up and let the IOU speakers be a little different here. Actually, PG&E is going to talk about some of the joint IOU recommendations, exactly to your point of like how to drop it. And I don't want to get too far into her lane, but it's like focusing on the NEM subsidy, focusing on some of these public purpose programs, rolling them off bills, and load growth as a core driver. But yeah.
All right, just in all my meetings with the Little Hoover Commission, every witness stood on their own. It wasn't a kind of a team play, so this is confusing to me. So I'll hold that question for PG&E. Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you, Commissioner Byer, then Commissioner Hernandez, and then Commissioner Sidley.
Commissioner Byer, we cannot hear you. You do not appear to be muted.
Try it again.
Can
There you
you
go.
hear me?
Now,
Now
Okay.
we can.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I defer to Commissioner Hernandez, the member of the subcommittee, before I ask my question?
yeah, of course.
I have 100 questions though, so you sure you want to defer to me? I apologize. I've been in this space for 27 years. I was an intervener for 3 years, but I think for purposes of this discussion, I know maybe someone else will touch upon it, but really around rate design, I know, you guys are different. You guys don't set your rates. There is something called the general rate case. Maybe talk a little bit about that. And then maybe talk about how it's a little bit like finding where the sun's at, that the sun's actually 8 minutes where it used to be. But because the PUC takes so long to do your rate case, a lot of times what you thought the cost was going to be is actually more. Maybe talk a little bit about that as well in terms of setting the rates, because that then will allow us to better think in terms of how to address this affordability issue.
Yeah. I could start maybe by talking a little bit about the general rate case. So it's like if we are, thinking about the utilities. By the way, I'm getting
And also, how frequently does it happen, or is supposed to happen?
You got it. Yeah. Am I coming through clear again? I was choppy there for a moment. Are we back? Okay, great. Yeah. So yes, I think you hit it. We have general rate cases, which are basically like our core investment plan. What we do is we do an assessment of what is needed on the grid based off like from top level plans down. So it's, how much renewable electricity we need to bring on, the state's transmission plans, also kind of taking into account the state's GHG goals. You formulate all those things into a general rate case. It's a large filing that we do. Interveners, I think like yourself, have participated in those over the years, refining what is this kind of utilities core investment plan in its service territory for the next 4 years. So we do that. We were talking about this earlier. It is a large filing. So for my colleagues at the folks at the PUC, it's a lot. It's a big tome. It gets dropped on their doorstep, and they have to figure it out as well as many of the other interveners in the world. And we try to help them walk through that. But I will tell you, I think it is your point is well taken. It's at some point, sometimes the timeliness of PUC decision making can drag on. If they were here, I'd imagine they'd say for very good reasons. But the reality is, as the time moves on, oftentimes it's like the marker is changing, right? And I could just tell you this for load growth, for instance. From when we've filed our 2025 general rate case to me sitting here today, we've already seen the growth and need for electric service in our service territory increase higher than what we had baked into our plan. And so it is because of the kind of the regulatory lag. Oftentimes we'll have to kind of submit further applications to the Public Utilities Commission to address those incremental costs that have kind of popped up over time. So it's definitely not a perfect system for running a business perfectly all the time. I think we would like to see kind of faster decisions out of the Public Utilities Commission, maybe a more iterative back and forth thing. But with the system we got, this is kind of what we do.
And what's the connection with the general rate case and my bill?
Yeah, so the idea would be like once the general rate case is approved, either in whole or in some part, then what you will see is increase, from our GRC will increase rates in the near term to pursue all those goals that were baked into the general rate case. They're state priorities. We're figuring out a plan to make those priorities a reality in our surface short term. So you will see rate increases from the general rate case, at least ours. I think and then that gets to okay, well, why are we doing this? Well, we're doing this and we're building out the grid and getting the grid ready, like we're talking about, for the load growth to the future, so that the state can achieve its transportation electrification goals, those other things. So we would say, yeah, you will see it in your electric bill, an increase for good purposes, but that's also why we try to talk about the idea of total energy share of wallet and the transition that we're going through.
No, thank you. And then just the other question I had, I mean, I hope your 2.6% increase is true. I think you have a lot of folks that work with developers, and we're just seeing a lot of people requesting more and more energy, particularly in areas that don't have infrastructure. So, I mean, I know the cost of that. So I'm hoping that's baked in. I also know that CAISO kind of messed up in their forecasting. So I know that they have to rethink how much load we actually are going to use in the next 5 to 10 years. But I'm hoping that it is capped.
Commissioner Byer, did you want to go down?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. An observation and 2 questions. The observation is, in the United States and history of regulatory agencies, we tend to swing back and forth between publicly owned utilities and private utilities, various regulatory agencies. And in modern times, we've seen the abolition of the Interstate Commerce Commission, deregulation of airlines, the Enron crisis, the meltdown of 2008. So there doesn't seem to be a regulatory perfection that has prevented harm. And so my questions are going to be pretty specific. In earlier hearings, we focused on the FAIR Plan and other, I'm going to call them unfunded mandates, that is public policy obligations that have been put onto investor-owned utilities, and wondering whether greater visibility about the alternative, that is the general fund and tax revenues, as opposed to a mandate on you and the bill then goes to the consumer. So do you or your investor-owned colleagues have a view about the optimal mix between taxpayer-funded implementation on climate change, wildfire, or dealing with those less fortunate in society, whether they should be paid for by tax revenue or they should continue to be part of the electricity bill?
Yes. I think the consensus view across the IOUs in the state of California is that there are a number of things, like what you call the public purpose programs, things that were either the kind of subsidies for low income, because, by the way, the general fund covers subsidies for other kind of core things, like the CalFresh program. They will subsidize food through the general fund. Would subsidizing electricity usage through the general fund be about it? We think the answer is yes. The rule of thumb, just to give you an idea of kind of most of the time, what we would suggest is probably best funded by general fund dollars or best funded just continue to be funded through rates. As we think about the costs of service, it's like an old rate making kind of concept. It's like, the cost of poles, the cost of wires, the cost of, paying our crews to work on those things. Those are all kind of core utility business costs that we think are right to continue to stay funded through rates. Those are the costs of electric service. There are other programs, whether it's energy efficiency incentives or, like we were talking about, some of the cross subsidies for low income bill relief. You could go into a bunch. There's even some procurement programs for very kind of niche technologies that don't really have a broader application, but maybe are just for a few kind of communities. Like, those are the sorts of programs that we feel like are better funded through the general fund, and that's because the tax base, and you guys know this very well, the tax base in California is progressive, where rates, and I think you've heard from some academics previously, are not as progressive. So if we're thinking about equity and kind of helping those folks, thinking about affordability, we would try to move some of these costs that were embedded in rates over to the general fund. A more progressive tax structure kind of be the right way to do it. And like, hopefully that delineation of like core utility services
Yes,
versus
that's helpful. That's helpful. The second question, and it can go in a bunch of different directions, relates to technology. How is the state best served by promoting, regulating, encouraging innovation? And related to that, the biggest capital expenditure in the next, I'll call it 10 to 20 years, is going to be a build out for data centers for artificial intelligence, where many consumers are concerned that they're going to be paying for what is essentially a corporate asset that's going to be used in ways that we don't completely understand. So maybe you could address the technology question as an investor-owned utility, and then maybe it's the third question, the artificial intelligence data center electricity projections.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe there's a way to start with some history and then get to today, because like, you know, if you look at things like the renewable portfolio standard, so that was, you know, it was this is what they call it. It's called a technology forcing policy, right? It's like you have to go and buy these renewable resources to achieve a state goal. No arguments there, but it's just the investor-owned utilities were pushed to the fore of that and were sent out to procure these resources that at the time, just full transfer, were more expensive than some of the other resources we could have had at the time. And that push to get investor-owned utilities and candidly ratepayers, because I think you guys probably know is all the costs of procurement are passed directly to customers with no markup. There's no profit or anything passed along. It's just the pure cost of that procurement going down there. Our IOU customers sort of bore the brunt of kind of buying those early emerging technologies. What did it do over time? It helped buy down the cost of those technologies today. Absolutely. We have seen the cost of solar drop. It's a success story. But I think maybe to where your question is heading, I think the investor-owned utility role going forward, I think I would suggest it's probably, if we could get the state to help in and buy and pay down some of those more nascent technologies and not pay that early adopter premium, we think that would be a really beneficial thing to customers. And that would be a place for the state to play more instead of kind of using the investor-owned utilities and our ratepayers as, you know, kind of the early adopters and helping to bring down the cost of that technology over time. So that, I think in general, that's kind of my sort of view on the right role for the state versus IOU customers at this point in the energy transition. And then on the data center side, I can tell you this, a few thoughts. Number one, I think that data centers can really be good load if they are brought on in the right places, which, as we've been talking about, can help bring downward pressure on rates. So part of me thinks the state ought to encourage as much as we can of that sort of development, just simply from the pure, you know, Adam is an electricity, you know, rate guide perspective. But I think there's also a lot of concerns to your point about like the broader, you know, ecosystem of data centers and what that might mean for consumers and the rest. And that's sort of outside of my core area of experience and expertise.
So has there been sufficient public conversation about the effect on electricity rates from the emergence of data center needs for artificial intelligence in the legislature or by the Public Utility Commission or the public in general? My view is not remotely close.
Yeah.
The projections about energy utilization are demonstrably wrong most of the time when you have a new technology for reasons you just explained on solar, but we don't have a historic pattern here other than internal combustion engine or something that's took decades to implement. And we're talking about doing it in a competitive environment. Well, California wants to create the data centers, but it's unclear who's going to pay for them and what the state is going to get back and what the people are going to get back from those investments. And you all are in the middle of that conversation. And is this being discussed enough is my question.
Yeah, I think it's so nascent. I think your intuition is right. I think it's still very early days. The implications for the grid, as you can imagine, it's also very dependent. Like, you know, okay, Google wants one here. You know, it's kind of, it doesn't feel like there's a cohesive state approach that has fully emerged around that. I know for a fact, I'm talking to some of the core regulatory agencies, they are very focused on this. The administration is hyper-focused. But yeah, I think maybe to your point, I don't know if it's matured enough to where everything's clear yet.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sidley.
So I just want to say a few things. This is less of a question and a statement. I used to work at the Department of Water and Power, so I take your statement that local
You froze.
municipal agencies don't need to get into, as you called it, technology forcing. I couldn't disagree with you more. DWP is every single day talked about, confronted with energy forcing and technology forcing. So for you to suggest that you are in some unique position and therefore your rates are higher, I've got to say, I got to say, I don't agree. At the mildest, I don't agree. I think that, in fact, DWP is more attuned to that. And when they have their board meetings and the public comes in and talks to us once every 2 weeks, they get slammed for not being more energy and technology forcing. So I think that statement doesn't hold true. I also think that one of the things that you said about DWP working in a more urban area, I think actually the difference is that the pole lines are spaced more further apart. And so when there are wind events and things like that, you're going to see less likely that a DWP line is going to cause a fire than some of these other lines. So I just want to say that I'm not quite aligned with what you've testified here to today. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sidley. Taking a look at the other commissioners, I see no hands raised, and it looks as though it's time to turn to Daniel again, and I want to thank you, Mr. Smith.
All right, thank you, Chair Nava. Shilpa Ramaiya is Vice President of Regulatory Proceedings and Rates at Pacific Gas and Electric, where she manages the company's general rate case and other proceedings before the CPUC and FERC, covering areas such as risk, gas, electric, and customer programs. Since joining PG&E in 2004, she has held progressively senior roles in regulatory and customer operations. Her work spans energy supply, pipeline safety, customer programs, and Diablo Canyon. She holds dual BA degrees in economics and communication from UC Davis. Ms. Ramaiya, please begin your testimony.
Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, Chair and members of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about one of the most pressing issues facing Californians, the affordability of electricity. At PG&E, we want what our customers want: safe, reliable, clean, and affordable energy service. Today, I would like to discuss the components of the electric bill, what's driving costs, and what are the opportunities we have to stabilize customer bills and set ourselves up for a decarbonized future. So what goes into the dollar bill paid by our customers? If you could put up that graphic, Daniel. Thank you. So let's start with the components of customer bills. I understand you have seen data breaking down these components into their cost categories. This dollar bill graphic is a different approach and explains where each portion of a customer's dollar goes. This represents PG&E's breakdown, but generally the other IUs have similar breakdowns. 32 cents of each dollar is the cost for PG&E to generate and buy electricity, which is a straight pass through to customers. The 31 cents supports state policy. You see that on the left side of the chart. We've broken down this 31 cents into a couple of buckets. You've got the wildfire safety work, which is 16 cents. And then you have other state mandated programs, renewable energy, low income discounts, energy efficiency initiatives, and other public policy goals. As for the rest of your electric bill, you'll see the cost of getting the electricity to your home, operating, maintaining, and upgrading the grid makes up 22% there of the typical bill, and then 10% is the portion that our regulators currently authorize as reasonable. for profit. And then 5% is taxes. And finally, residential customers without solar pay 15% or $34 a month more to cover the grid costs for solar customers. For 2025, this cost has increased to 18%. We can take down the graphic. Thank you. So what is driving these increases? I'm not going to have any surprises for you here, right? There's three key factors that we have seen: the growth in wildfire mitigation work, adapting to our changing climate, increasing costs for public purpose programs, and the growing NEM cost shift.
Let me interrupt you. I apologize in advance. The Commissioner Hernandez had his hand up.
Sure.
Just no, I like that dollar bill, but just, I mean, in essence, you were saying that some customers are actually paying $1.34 because of the cost shift, and some customers are paying 76 cents, or sorry, 64 cents, 66 cents. There you go.
Yeah. So without the solar, they pay 15% more. Yes.
And then two, I don't know if you get super granular. I know you lumped in all the public purpose programs. Back in 1999, low-income programs were 0.6% of the bill. About how much are they now in terms of CARE and ESAP?
Yeah, so CARE and ESA, and also including energy efficiency, those programs for all the utilities range between 5 and 8% of the customer bill now.
I'm just talking about the low-income ones, so it's CARE and ESA, not energy efficiency.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on the exact, but we're probably somewhere in the 3 to 4% range there.
Thank you.
Yeah, please continue.
Sure. So what can be done about these three sort of areas we talked about and how to reduce bills? The 6 recommendations I share are supported by the IOUs, and we find them appealing for 2 reasons. They offer solutions that can provide customers relief immediately. They also provide a roadmap for real, lasting affordability beyond the present cost of living pressures everyone is facing, so we can realize our shared decarbonization goals. So you've heard about some of these, but I'll build upon them slightly. The first is shifting public purpose programs to the state budget or other reliable funding source. You heard this from Adam as well. We do see this as an opportunity to make sure that these are funded by taxpayers in a progressive way. And this would also reduce bills by 5 to 8%. It's also more equitable for our lower income customers. The second one is around NEM, right? Statewide, the lack of fairness here in terms of the cost subsidy is amounting to $8.5 billion. So we as utilities support transitioning NEM 1 and 2 customers to NEM 3 after 10 years or upon sale of the property. Third, we believe that the state should leverage the cap or trade program more to address affordability and reform the climate credit. So first, we see the potential for more allowances to be shared with electric customers. And this will allow electric customers to receive the benefits. And also, in terms of those benefits, instead of having them produced for customers twice a year, which is the current framework, to actually have them spread over all of the summer months. This will allow customer bill smoothing during those peak periods. The fourth area here we see is for wildfire mitigation needs to be supported by increased public funding. Similar to public purpose programs being funded off the utility bill, there's portions of wildfire mitigation that do benefit all Californians, and we could see those being funded through alternative sources.
That's a quick question.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Is there something up that you're referencing? Because I don't have anything that I'm looking at here. Because it sounds like you're counting down on something that we're all supposed to see.
Oh no, I'm
okay.
Listing 6. The only graphic I had was the bill breakdown.
Okay.
That dollar bill.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the fourth one is around wildfire mitigation and finding alternative sources to support that. You know, we have a significant amount of vegetation management spending in PG&E. In particular, we have about $1.5 billion. And so that's an annual amount that we've spent, and we're really working hard to reduce that amount. But we do see that when wildfires are mitigated, more customers than just our own benefit, and we could see potential for that to be funded in a different, more progressive way as we face this changing climate. In addition, you know, we see that still remains a significant funding gap to address this wildfire risk. IOU customers invest approximately $6 billion annually in wildfire prevention, while we're seeing the state contribute less than $500 million. So the more that we can support our local communities and our state agencies to do other forms of wildfire mitigation, ensure that any ignitions are limited and do not spread, will really help in terms of the hardening of our area and all our customers. Go ahead.
Yeah, please, Vice Chair Cannella.
Oh, I'm having some technical difficulties, so I may go in and out, so my apologies. But so I hear you saying there's ways to lower prices, but it's all other things, right? So that'd be equivalent of my company. If we're having problems, and I go, we would do better if they just paid me more. So are there things that you can do, PG&E can do to lower prices versus, you know, securitization versus capital outlay? I mean, because the chances of you getting anything in the, you know, general fund, I think are going to be very challenging. So are the things that you PG&E can do on their own to lower prices? And if you're going to get to that, that's fine. I can wait.
No, I'll take care of that right now, Vice Chair. I will first start by saying that our bills today in 2025 are lower than they were in 2024 around the same time. And in 2026, we are projecting lower bills than 2025. So we are looking forward to that trajectory and planning for it. And I'll also add that we're not expecting any more rate increases on the electric side in 2025. So that's kind of the 25 look, the 26 look. And then we just filed our general rate case back on May 15th. And with that full ask of the general rate case, we are projecting bills that are flat from 25 for 2027 when that rate case is expected to be implemented.
And what was the base rate? I thought I heard you say 60 cents or something. Is that? I was trying to fix my computer when you were talking. What is the rate that you're referencing right now? Your base rate?
The base rate, we're talking about bills.
Okay. You didn't say
the combined gas and electric bill.
Okay, and how much is that?
The combined gas and electric bill is hovering about $300 a month.
Okay.
On average.
And so you said the last 2 years it's been lower. Why is that? What happened for it to be lower?
For it to be lower this year than those other years?
You said that we're less this year than we were in 2023, I thought, 2024.
Yeah, we've seen some of our wildfire cost recovery come off the bill. So we've seen that come off the bill. We have also seen costs related to our GRC come off the bill as well. That's going to be coming off at the end of 2025.
What's GRC?
General rate case, excuse me.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Right.
And so we're seeing costs that have been previously incurred come off the bill. We are also projecting lower procurement costs, so generation procurement costs as we head into 2026. In addition, we have found programs that we were not spending what had been authorized for, and we have moved to return those dollars back to customers. That's about $500 million. We have renegotiated some renewable contracts to be lower cost. And so we've passed those savings on to customers. We have a couple of pending matters before the CPUC to reduce how sort of above market costs are measured and passed on to customers. That's bringing down rates. Couple other things, we have worked with stakeholders in front of the commission as well as the commission on moving to self-insurance for wildfire costs as well as for non-wildfire costs. And so with that self-insurance, both of those two are leading to savings over the next couple of years for customers of about $2.5 billion. So, and I know the other utilities have followed suit and also have arrangements underway or have already been decided. So these are opportunities we are looking for. And, you know, I'll just say, like, we are very much focused on a culture of how do we do it more cheaply? How do we reduce risk and do it more cheaply? What are the ideas we have to eliminate waste, to run processes better? So internally to the company, we're very much focused on how to reduce bills and costs for customers.
Self-insurance, is that for liability purposes? So I don't, that seems like a lot of money. So does PG&E have the capacity, if there's a multi-billion-dollar liability case, you have the resources to cover that with self-insurance?
Yes, we do, and there is a settlement that we have with intervener groups, the California Public Utilities, the California Public Advocates Office, and the Utility Reform Network that we have on that self-insurance, and there are terms if there were an event to happen. So, you know, we're happy to be able to partner with them to really produce that value for customers.
Thank you.
I had Commissioner Hernandez and then followed by Commissioner Byer.
I think you answered the question in terms of confusion of rates, but if you want to, I mean, there was this confusion that there was a bunch of rates that were going up, but as you said, actually there was a decrease from last year to this year.
Yeah, there was, I know, you know, there's been a lot of questions around 6 rate changes, and thanks for your question, last year that happened. Just to be clear, those were not all increases. There were decreases within those 6 rate changes last year, including a 9% decrease in July of last year, which is pretty substantial for PG&E. So we are working to find ways to reduce costs and pass that on to customers quickly. We are also working to smooth the rate experience for customers. We have heard from customers there's too many changes happening. So we're really working with our regulator to consolidate changes and to bring a more stable bill experience for customers.
And how do you do that without doing a general rate case? Are you allowed to just set rates on your own? I always thought that you had to get approval from the CPUC to be able to adjust the rates.
Yes, we do. We need approval from the CPUC to adjust rates. There are some matters that are within a general rate case, and some matters like procurement matters, public purpose programs, some wildfire matters that are outside of a general rate case at times. And so they have different schedules, and some things come in and out of rates at different times. And so we're looking for the opportunity to work with our regulator more closely to smooth that experience. And it might mean that we take a cost and spread it over a little bit of a longer period in order to not have as many rate changes in a year.
Right. Commissioner Byer.
Yeah, I have a broad question for you, and it relates to the tension between outside actors and an investor-owned utility. There are a bunch of things that occur in the life of any business where mistakes are made, either purposeful or not. PG&E has gone through bankruptcy. I'll use that as an example. And there are various forces, liability, regulation, legislation, pressure from bondholders or shareholders that cause management to reform things, to change things. And I guess what I want to hear from you about is what have been the most effective outside influences on improving the management practices and cost structure of PG&E in the last 20 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in terms of outside influences, it's really it's probably a focus on priorities. right? We want to be aligned with the state's priorities and the policies, and that's really what drives where our spending goes. And so I would say that, you know, we're going to continue to work on how to optimize and become more efficient in delivering the state's, you know, priorities and policies and what's been approved.
But
that's
every company wants to be more efficient. I'm looking for something more granular, because I guess what I'm getting at is I'll pick on one particular thing, because our next hearing, we're going to hear from the Public Utility Commission. That regulatory system sounds to me broken, too complicated, too opaque, not clear on their goals. But it may be that they are under-resourced and that we should recommend something very targeted within a subunit of the Public Utility Commission. What I'm trying to get at is the first witness talked about this being a compact or a partnership between the government and the private sector. I don't see that. I see adversaries. And what I'm looking for is, what's the area that would be most effective in changing the behavior and outcomes of PG&E and other investor-owned utilities to address the question of affordability?
Yeah, so I would go back to, and I'm sorry, Vice Chair, if this is not totally responsive to your question, but I will try here. I think we need to look at a deeper examination of cost shifts that are happening. I would look again at what mandates are existing out there and whether they're really the best use of customer dollars. And that I think some more attention in those areas. I would support additional staff at, you know, the CPUC, particularly in the administrative law judge unit, for more timely processing of cases.
I guess my frustration is the same as Commissioner Cannella. The idea, and I'm generally or directionally supportive of taking things off the bill and putting them on the general fund, but it's also, as he said, maybe not the most politically realistic change, but it has nothing to do with changed practices by investor-owned utilities. And what we're struggling with is, if everybody's going to do something to address affordability and simultaneously do the right thing for lower income customers and pursue climate goals, something's got to give. And you all and the regulatory system has to change in a much more fundamental way. And maybe you're not hearing this from your customers, but I got to believe people are unhappy and they want something done. And I'm not hearing a comprehensive reform other than make the taxpayers pay for it, as opposed to the ratepayers. That's not enough.
I hear you. I hear you. There's not, you know, a single solution. I will say that, you know, we do believe that we have the opportunity here to really drive down bills, right? So we have pursued a loan from the Department of Energy, which we project will save customers over $1 billion. We do see beneficial load growth occurring, right? Even with our GRC, we are projecting that the increase from the GRC will be flat starting in 28, as early as 28, because of load growth, and actually go negative starting in 2030. So we are seeing that future and projecting it. I'm not coming to mind on sort of what's that overarching solution here.
Thank you.
So
Commissioner Hernandez, yeah, go ahead.
just one quick thing. I know as a partial solution, the CPUC came up with in the legislature with a fixed charge, mainly to get at the cost shifting. I just saw that Nevada increased their fixed charge. I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive. You create a fixed charge, but then you lower bills overall. I mean, is that something we should be looking at as well?
Yeah, we have a fixed charge, and all the utilities in California have a fixed charge going into bills in the next year or two here. And we, had asked, as some others did, to actually have a higher fixed charge to more thoughtfully cover really the true fixed costs of the utility. And we believe that would benefit more vulnerable customers.
But can you talk about how a higher fixed charge lowers bills? I guess that's the part that seems a little confusing, but I've seen it map out.
Yeah, we have some customers today that are not paying the true cost of the system just because of the way that rates have been designed, right? And we with a fixed charge that would cover the fixed costs of the system, and really your variable would be more around your usage. So it's inequitable today. And so it would be more fair, and we could see lower bills with more of that equity coming in and laid in with these fixed charges. Thanks.
All right. Any further questions from commissioners? So have you concluded your presentation?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Let me turn this back over to Daniel again.
All right, thank you, Chair Nava. Derek Dolfie is Director of Energy at the California Municipal Utilities Association, leading the association's energy program and coordinating legislative and policy positions with its members. He previously managed public policy for ChargePoint and spent 6 years with Cal Cities, focusing on environmental and community issues. He holds a master's in public policy from UC Irvine and a BA in political science from San Diego State University. Mr. Dolfie, you may begin your testimony.
All right. Good morning, folks. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify today. It's a pleasure to be here. As Daniel mentioned, my name is Derek Dolfie. I'm the Director of Energy for the California Municipal Utilities Association. I have a number of slides here. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly so I can make sure to get to your questions, but I do hope that you find them helpful as a reference document in the future here. So I will be going through them fairly quickly, but please feel free to interrupt me. I did want to spend, next slide, please, a few moments just talking about publicly owned electric utilities and how we're structured, because we are very different from our friends in the investor-owned utility and the community choice aggregator space. So it sounds like a couple of you are familiar with POUs, but for the rest that aren't, we are not-for-profit public agencies that are vertically integrated. We actually do generation, sometimes transmission, and procurement on behalf of our members. Next slide. We are actually governed by locally elected officials. So we're either governed through city councils or regionally or district elected officials. Or we are governed by appointed boards, which are governed by city councils or these elected officials. So we have very significant public engagement, and we are directly accountable to our customers. Next slide. There's 4 types of POUs. Obviously, we've talked about one of them a lot today, which is Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. That is a municipal department within a city. We also have municipal utility districts. So for those that live in Sacramento, SMUD is an example of that. We have public utility districts. So for folks in Trinity County, that we have Trinity Public Utility District. And then we also have irrigation districts. So I think Vice Chair Canella mentioned Turlock Irrigation District. That is another form where folks that have traditionally served water also got into the energy space as well. So all 4 of those types of businesses count as POUs, publicly owned utilities, and they all are structured very differently, but similar in the sense that they're all publicly governed. Next slide. There's 49 POUs throughout the state. We serve 25% of the state's load, and we're very geographically diverse. We have urban, suburban, rural, mountainous, valleys, desert, you name it. We're in all corners of the state, and we range from having tens of customers or hundreds of customers to millions of customers. Next slide. Just a quick comparison here between 2 very different members. As I mentioned, Trinity Public Utility District, located in Weaverville in Trinity County. It's 2,200 square miles of service territory, but literally only 7,350 customers. So very rural, very big, very wide, not very dense. Then you look at our friends in LADWP. They have 478 square miles, so a lot smaller in the city of LA, but obviously they serve a significant portion more customers, with having 1.6 million customers there. So not one size fits all for our folks in public utility land. Next slide. Like I said, we're locally accountable, vertically integrated. We're not for profit. And we also focus a lot on the needs and responses to our community. As also previously stated by one of the commissioners, we have public meetings every 2 weeks, and if folks have grievances, which they often do, they know where to find us and they can voice that to us directly or to the folks that we report to, be it our governing boards or our city councils. We do have some oversight from the legislature and the federal government, but we are governed locally and we are not subject to California Public Utility Commission oversight or regulation. Next slide. Like I said, we have our local governing boards. That's how we're directly regulated. We also are overseen by the California Energy Commission for various planning and reporting purposes. We're also overseen by the California Air Resources Board for things like cap and trade compliance and the Advanced Clean Fleets zero emission vehicle regulations. We also have a lot of interaction with the Wildfire Safety Advisory Board on them commenting and helping make sure that we get our wildfire mitigation plans into a good spot. And then, of course, at the federal level, for those members that we have that are transmission entities, they also have to deal with our friends at FERC and NERC. Next slide. I know we talked a lot about POUs, but we also have public balancing authorities. So everyone's familiar with the CAISO. They have about 75% of all the load, or 67% of the load in California as far as transmission and grid operations. We do have a number of California balancing authorities that are in the state. We have 4 that I'll mention. Next slide. We have BANC, which is the balancing authority of Northern California that has folks like SMUD, Roseville, Modesto, Redding, Trinity, and Shasta. LADWP is their own balancing authority that also includes the cities of Burbank and Glendale. Turlock Irrigation District, as we mentioned, they have Turlock as well as Merced Irrigation District and their balancing authority. And then we have Imperial Irrigation District down in the very southeastern corner of the state that includes just their service territory. So not only are we publicly owned electric utilities, but some of us actually have our own balancing authorities as well. Next slide. I'm going to skip over this. We had just some good stats for one of our members. We highlighted Roseville, who's a very active member of ours. So feel free to look at that at your leisure. Next slide. And then we also have joint action agencies in the state. And this is something very unique to public power in California. We have both our friends at SCAPA and NCPA. SCAPA is the Southern California Public Power Authority. NCPA is the Northern California Power Agency. These are 2 joint action agencies that were formed by their members here, which I will not list off, but you can see they pulled their resources together in order to do joint procurement and generation. So it's really a great way for the public utilities to band together to get that larger bang for their buck by pooling resources. And so we work very much with our friends at SCAP and NCPA, and they're great partners to us here at CMUA. Next slide. Now, this is probably what we're going to find a little bit more interesting. Here's some ideas that we have about things that the legislature and the state can do on energy affordability, which is obviously a very hot topic this year. First up, cap and trade, very important to us. We want to maintain our existing POU allowance allocation credits and our proceed flexibility. A regional grid. In the past, POUs have been opposed to regionalization, but this year there's a pending bill in the legislature that we're very supportive of, the Pathways proposal, to try and move us towards a regional organization to oversee a Western energy grid. We think that'll help with affordability and reliability. We also want to focus on our current goals, right? We are directly regulated. We have statutory obligations to get to 100% renewable energy for retail sales by 2045. We also have our RPS goals that ratchet up over time. So we're certainly happy to go in that direction and meet those goals, but we also are asking our friends in the legislature to make sure not to add new things to our plate. Yes, I see a hand.
Yeah, Commissioner Hernandez.
Retail sales. So that's not just generation, because I think you guys still have a percentage of the load coming from coal. Is that correct?
So most of our members do not. I know LADWP was the largest member that had that, but they're actually phasing that out. And I believe the timeline is fairly soon that they will be not have any coal in their procurement.
Okay. I think at 7 of yours still have coal.
Okay. So yeah, focusing on that, making sure that we can reach our goals there and focus on meeting our RPS and SB 100 goals. And then also wildfire liability. I know our friends in the IOU space brought this up, but I do want to mention that we do, some of our members that are more rural, like I said, Trinity, PUD, for example, they are at an increased wildfire risk. And so we do spend quite a bit of our dollars there for certain public utilities on wildfire mitigation and the liability that's associated with that. So looking into how we can make sure to address those cost issues for us. And then next slide, and this is my last slide here before I'll pause my presentation. I'm going to go to the next one. Oh, there we go. Here's some electricity cost drivers that I want to mention. So right now we're seeing in the market increased power purchase agreement prices. That's due to some high demand and low supply of PPAs and renewable energy in the state. That's partially due to a long interconnection queue, which I'm sure all of you have heard about, for new generation resources to come online, as well as we have seen and we will see into the future increasing demand due to AI data centers and building/transportation decarbonization. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner Garcetti, followed by Vice Chair Cannella. Gil, you're muted.
Okay, here I am. Thank you for being here and appreciate how direct you were with your testimony. Your organization you represent, what are the top 3 priorities that you have in order 1, 2, and 3?
In order to, I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Just in order in terms of importance to you. I mean, if your top priority is really by far where you spend most of your time and energy and thinking for the groups that you represent. Okay, just emphasize that point. So if you could just outline for us the top 3 priorities your organization have in affecting really electricity costs.
Yeah, I think affordability is 1, 2, and 3 for us.
Okay.
I mean, as public agencies, right, we do everything we possibly can to provide the greatest and most reliable and renewable energy service to our customers as we possibly can. And we want to make sure that we have a legislative and regulatory arena that allows us to do that within reason, right? And so we are constantly, you know, we're not ratepayer advocates per se, but I certainly feel like that because almost all of the legislation and regulations we weigh in on, we talk about what this impact this legislation or regulation will have on the cost of energy. And we always try and make sure that we're using our ratepayer dollars and customer dollars as cost effectively as possible. So, I mean, that's a through line through everything that we do. And I certainly think that that's number 1. I think number 2 would make sure that we can continue to provide reliable energy service, right? And that's where we get into wildfire mitigation and liability. We are very much aligned with our friends in the IOU space that we want to continue to provide clean, affordable, reliable energy, no matter what happens disaster-wise, a wildfire, an earthquake, a windstorm, you name it. And a lot of our time and attention goes into that. And that's, I think, probably the number 1 and number 2 thing that we're focused on.
Thank you.
Commissioner Garcetti, just in response to some of that, I think one of the key differences with the publicly owned utilities is when customers are unhappy, they show up at the meetings. And believe you me, I've seen a lot of meetings where ratepayers show up and they go, what happened? What are you doing? How are you doing it? So the accountability is immediate. I mean, that's been my experience with a publicly owned utility.
Thank you for sharing that.
Let me go to Vice Chair Cannella, followed by Commissioner Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to that point, TID, we have 5 elected board members. We just throw them out. So if things get too crazy, they're out of a job. So, when you talk about renewable, 100% renewable, it's so exciting to think about that. Is that wind and solar largely? Is there other parts that make that up?
I think that's the vast majority of what we're procuring. Obviously, we have our RPS standards, which exclude certain types of resources and have definitions for what counts as renewable. So we're certainly trying to meet that standard, but a large portion of it comes from wind and solar. We're also looking at batteries. We're also looking at geothermal, some of those other resources, but typically that's it. I know hydrogen is another resource that is starting to be talked about. It's not, I don't think that's a settled law yet as far as if it's renewable or not, depending on the color of the hydrogen, it's how it's produced. But that's another technology that we're looking at for a generation resource that is dispatchable.
What, generally speaking, there are a lot of representative districts here, but what generally, how much is renewable on average amongst all those?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase?
So if we're trying to get to 100% renewable,
yeah,
on average now, all those different agencies that you listed, do you know what their average renewable is right now?
Yeah, like you said, we do have a number of folks that are in very different places. We actually have a number of utilities, LADWP and SMUD come to mind, that actually have more aggressive targets where they want to be net zero by 2035. So they're actually really aggressively going after this. So some of our members, they actually get all of their power from hydro, for example. So they're 100%, zero emission, but they're not necessarily renewable. We also have some members that, have had legacy contracts that they're now getting out of, which makes their transition a little bit slower. But almost everyone is moving in that direction, I would say. It's hard to say a specific number, but we certainly have a number of members that are well on their way, and the ones that are falling behind are certainly on the path to get there.
Well, LA versus Merced Irrigation District, 2 million customers versus 5,000 customers. It's a little harder. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that when we have the 100% renewable, that cost will probably go up, I would assume. Who knows? Technology may be so fantastic that it doesn't. But when you mentioned that you're fine, 2045, as long as the legislature doesn't add more on your plate, I think is what you said. What could they add? 110% renewable, 120% renewable? I mean, what are the fears out there that you think about?
Yeah, there's I like to say that a lot of times legislation is well intended, but it's a little bit of a death by 1,000 cuts for us as public utilities, right? We don't have capital that we can pull on. We don't have shareholders. We don't have investors, right? We just have ratepayers. And so every little thing that they add, a new reporting requirement, a new unfunded mandate that we have to do, counting certain things more than others as renewable or not, all of those add up, and all of those make it so we're continually having to go back and add a little bit more and add a little bit more to our ratepayers. So we always tell the legislature, please, think about what this will do to the direct impact it will have on our customers. And that's a lot of the testimony I provide in the legislature and in our comments is, hey, great idea, but can we do this in a different way so we're not having to spend so much of our ratepayer dollars to get there?
Well, I hope they're listening. So the last thing, I mentioned at the beginning that the investor-owned utilities versus the publicly owned utilities, it's about a 50% cost difference, and in TID it's about 100% cost difference. It's twice as expensive with the investor-owned. Any ideas, your perspective on why there's such a big difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, the reason why there's a difference there is it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison. While we both supply energy to our customers and do generation procurement and have distribution, that's kind of where the similarities end. We're structured completely different. We're governed completely differently. We have different structures. It's just, there's certain things I think you heard a lot from PG&E and SoCal Edison that the PUC has these public programs that are funded through rates. We don't have that because we're directly, regulated by our city councils and board of governors. So it's hard for me to really draw parallels to why we're better when it comes to, or cheaper when it comes to rates. But I certainly think that it's part of it is our structure and how we're governed.
Okay, so the publicly owned utilities don't have to pay these same benefits that the IOUs do?
So if it's a PUC required program, since we're not PUC jurisdictional, we don't have to, we don't comply with that.
Well, that's a big difference right there. So great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go to Commissioner Byer, followed by Commissioner Hernandez.
You're on mute, Commissioner.
You're muted, David.
If you could go back to your last slide.
We'll get that up.
The second half of that slide is what I want to focus on.
Yeah.
Because I don't think you got to it, and I have some questions about it, but let people focus on what you've written, which is federal changes to solar tax incentives. I think there's a broader question here, which is to the extent that both the municipally owned and the investor-owned utilities are in harness towards climate goals, that is reduction of carbon use. And there is another very much larger force out there, the federal government, that's sending inconsistent signals. In the previous Congress, the previous administration, there was a very strong signal to encourage renewables, encourage solar, and lots of money, hundreds of billions of dollars. And the budget bill that's pending proposes to largely, but not completely, eliminate those incentives. Is it fair to say the net consequence of that will be to drive up the cost of complying with California's mandates on renewables and other energy efficiency activities the state has required to be undertaken by utilities?
So yeah, if the federal government removes some of these renewable energy tax incentives, there will be a direct increase in the cost of electricity in California, given that, we're moving to 100% renewable. And that's certainly something that we'd like to avoid because we want to keep our rates as low as possible for our customers while providing that renewable power. So it's certainly something that we're not favoring is reducing or eliminating those tax incentives for renewable energy. Absolutely.
Okay, so this is a tax. If this bill passes, it's a tax on ratepayers.
It's going to increase the cost of electricity.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Right. So for CMUA, and I think you probably already answered this, but you said, but overall, the cost for energy for your customers is almost half of that paid by if you're getting service from an investor-owned utility.
Right now, the current data we have puts us at, we start at about 20% lower rates, but then it's as mentioned by Adam, it varies depending on the POU and depending on who the investor-owned utility in the area is. So it can go up from there, but typically I think on the low end we see 20% rate difference, and that can go up significantly depending on the POU.
Got it. All right. Commissioner Hernandez.
Just to clarify that public power does have public purpose programs. The state requires them. It's a PU code section 385, and they also have low income programs. I might have had a role in putting it in code, so yes.
So he's why. Okay. I believe you've got another slide. Do you have another slide?
Yeah, my last slide there was simply just saying, here's my contact information and about CMUA. So we're a trade association. We represent all of our members, and we're happy to be a resource. We also, I didn't talk about it because it's not germane to this hearing, but we also represent publicly owned wastewater and water agencies as well. So we do the whole gambit of water and power publicly owned water and power utilities in California. So
now, before I let you go, I want to just raise one question. The investor-owned utilities, we're speaking of the sorts of things they have to do in order to attract capital so that they can engage in programs that they need. How is it different for a publicly owned utility?
Yeah, publicly owned utilities have access to tax-free bonds as public entities. We also typically have access to lower rate bond costs as well, given that we're public entities, and we're seen as very stable and reliable sources of funding. So we do have access to that, as well as we do have the ability to raise rates with a vote of our locally elected boards. So there is less hoops to jump through when we need to do something. We also have, as I mentioned, our joint action agencies. Not every POU is in a joint action agency, but there are ways for publicly owned electric utilities to come together to pool resources to try and get more economies of scale when it comes to procurement or even generation.
And it seems to me that one of the complaints of the investor-owned utilities is that it takes too long to go through the process as it relates to changes that they want to make. Now, with a publicly owned utility, I'm guessing that those kinds of changes can be made at a board meeting.
Yeah, given that we're directly regulated, we do have more flexibility and customization to our customers. And I think that's also where you get a lot of the differences and kind of good ideas that we can hatch, is we have, 40 odd different utilities that are all trying different things and trying to make the best, most reliable service that they can at the most affordable price. And so sometimes we have a utility that has a great idea, and we are able to share that with other utilities and kind of go from there. So we have certainly a little bit more of the laboratories of democracy at the local level for coming up with different and new ideas.
Commissioner Hernandez.
just kind of overarching question. I mean, a great presentation. It sounds Pew's doing well, but it also sounds like you don't have an affordability issue. Is that correct? You don't foresee rates increasing, and then you want to mitigate some of that?
No, I want to be clear. It's hard to say, so I'll try and say it as clearly as I can. Even though we typically have lower rates than the investor-owned utilities, that does not mean that we're not facing affordability challenges. And the way I'll put it is, if you have I'm making this up, right? If you have a bill that's $10 and you increase it by $5, that's a huge increase for that $10 bill, even though that $5 price might seem inconsequential if you have a $300 bill. But that $5 bill is a significant increase. And we are certainly seeing, as I mentioned on that slide that we talked about a moment ago, we're seeing PPA prices increase. We're seeing the cost of renewables increase in the short term. We're also having, it's more expensive to build infrastructure. And as previously stated, there was federal dollars that were coming down for that are on pause. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now. So we're certainly still facing our affordability challenges. We're just in a different starting point than our other friends in the utilities are.
Yeah, and I think part of what has to be factored into, if you take a look at the location of the publicly owned utilities, so many of them are in rural areas where the income level, right, of your constituents and ratepayers is not likely to be the same as in Silicon Valley or Beverly Hills or large urban areas.
Yeah, we certainly, like I said, we're typically in the footprint of a single city, or in some cases a PUD. They're a county, but they typically tend to be very rural counties: Trinity County, Lassen County, and then we have a lot of small cities. We have Merced, we have Modesto, we have Turlock. These are communities that are not as big as LADWP, but then of course we have folks like SMUD and LADWP, which are very urban, right? So we really do run the whole gambit.
Right. So if you're in a place like Merced, you probably enjoy hunting and fishing and other kinds of activities that are different from what you experience in Los Angeles. So thank you, Derek, for that presentation. Let me go back to Daniel.
Thank you.
Our final witness is Beth Vaughan, who serves as Chief Executive Officer at the California Community Choice Association. In this role, Ms. Vaughan oversees advocacy, policy, and communications for a growing network of community choice energy providers. Her prior roles include Executive Director of the California Cogeneration Council and Senior Advisor to Environment and Conservation Cabinet Ministers in New Zealand. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Queen's University in Canada and a Master's of Science from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. Ms. Vaughan, you may begin your testimony.
Great. All right. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for the invitation to participate in today's hearing. I have to tell you, it's very difficult to go last. I've wanted to jump in and be part of the conversation. Great questions from the commissioners. So I'm looking forward to our discussion. As Daniel said, my name is Beth Vaughan. I lead the California Community Choice Association. We are the trade association for the community choice aggregators, which I'm going to refer to as CCAs, yet another acronym in our energy space here. We are local government nonprofit agencies, and that we serve as local retail energy providers. We're serving customers in California. My plan is to quickly explain who CCAs are and the core of what we do, and then I'd really like to focus the majority of the time on the factors impacting affordability, specifically on the generation side of the utility bill, as well as rate reduction tools that we've identified. So I'm going to zip through these first slides, but please stop and interrupt me at any point. So I wanted to put the timeline up here because compared to the previous speakers who are representing the investor-owned utilities and the publicly owned utilities, we're relatively young. The point here is that legislators created community choice aggregators in the wake of the energy crisis back in 2000. And it was Carol Migden who promoted Assembly Bill 117. It was signed into law in 2002, but it wasn't until 2010 that the first CCA, Marin Clean Energy, actually started serving customers. In 2016 this association that I represent was formed, and it was really based on the 6 CCA CEOs at the time recognized a need for a shared service model. So we focus on policy development advocacy at the regulatory agencies and in the legislature, as well as facilitating those best practices that Derek referred to, because we are public power as well. I'm going to talk a little bit in some other slides, but I want to mention that we have very much followed that public power model, learned from our sister agencies, and we have also formed joint action agencies that are able to do things like CC Power, California Community Power, where 9 CCAs jointly procure together at scale, also to perhaps procure emerging technologies, as well as a financing authority, which I want to talk about. So the last dot there is 2025, and at the moment we have 25 community choice aggregators serving customers in over 200 cities and counties. So next slide, please. Really important, because this is where I'm going to explain how we're between a rock and a hard place. CCAs can only form in the territories of the investor-owned utility. So so there are different types of models. There can be a single city model. So think of the city of San Francisco, they have Clean Power SF, or the city of San Jose with San Jose Clean Energy. The other is the Joint Powers Authority, like Clean Power Alliance. Clean Power Alliance is in Southern California. It serves 36 cities and the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles and Ventura counties, making it the 3rd largest utility in California based on load. A lot of people don't know that. Okay, we can only control the generation side of the bill. Some refer to us as Muni-Light. Our primary job is to procure energy and capacity, the 2 components of electricity. And we partner with the IOUs here, you see, who are responsible for the wires, the transmission and distribution. They also do, under the law, they do the billing. So there only one utility bill is received by the customer. On the gen side, it would identify the CCA that is doing the job there. And it would be the IOU, the PG&E or Edison or San Diego Gas and Electric. We are the default providers in our communities. So that's very important, especially as we look towards load growth. Big question I always get, who oversees us, right? And we are a mix of what you just heard from the previous representatives. So we are load serving entities, can only form in the IO territories. So that means that we are regulated by the Public Utilities Commission for all of those sorts of compliance issues. Think integrated resource planning, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS, resource adequacy, all these sorts of things. We have compliance requirements and penalties if we don't meet those goals or those targets or requirements. On the other hand, CCAs are governed by the governing boards that Derek just spoke of. I could show you the same slide. We have public meetings. So the governing boards are made up of the elected officials, for example, county supervisors, mayors, city council members. And so they're accountable to the communities that they serve. The governing boards set the rates and approve the procurement. We don't have to go back to the PUC like the IOUs do to get advice letters approved regarding procurement. We can do that. However, our procurement has to fit into the integrated resource plan and the procurement orders that the CPUC can issue. Question about what's our #1 priority? It absolutely is affordability. These governing boards, again, the public meetings, they hear from the customer and from the public every month. Yes, Commissioner Canella.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. So do CCAs, do you pay for the grid that you use? So the IOUs own it, or I don't know how it works exactly, but do you pay to use the grid?
No.
So you use their infrastructure, they charge their customers, and you don't pay anything. That'd be one reason why you're cheaper, right?
Well, remember, it's one bill, right? So we share the customers with the same customers. So we partner, and we have the retail side, we'll have the generation side of the bill, and they will have the T&D side. So at the end of the day, I'm a customer, I'm in the East Bay of San Francisco, for instance. MCE is the one that I get my generation from, and PG&E is the transmission and distribution. I, as the customer, I pay.
Okay, so PG&E owns the grid, and I may be saying that wrong, but so they own the grid. And so if I were a customer, PG&E somehow has broken out what the cost of transmission is, and they charge that, well, you will charge for the power.
Correct.
So,
And
your point is it doesn't matter. It's the same thing. They're still recouping the cost for it.
And in fact, maybe I'll fast forward on this. What happens is there are rate comparisons available both through the Public Utilities Commission site, on all the IOU site, on all the CCA sites, where it will show, I can go in and I can say, okay, I'm residential tiered rate plan E1, it could be commercial, it could be agricultural, it could be whatever the rate schedule is. And I'll see in there, what is PG&E charging? What is MCE's? Well, in this case, I've got one up for AVA, which is East Bay Community Energy. They have Bright Choice program. They have a 100% renewable program called AVA Renewable 100. And I can see it all broken out. What's the generation rate in dollars per kilowatt hour? I can see the delivery rate that the IOU does. And then I can see something called the power charge and difference adjustment and the franchise fee rate. And that was one of your questions, Vice Chair Canella, that you had for the previous speakers regarding why are some more expensive than others. Okay, one of these things, this power charge and difference adjustment, we pay it and the IOU customer pays it. We both pay it. And what it is the above market cost for legacy contracts that were state mandated, PUC mandated, so not mandated of the publicly owned utilities, but mandated of the investor-owned utilities to go incentivize battery storage or maybe some of the first solar or what have you. And you have contracts, they're called legacy contracts that still exist. Some of them are evergreen that go on forever. And that above market cost, we have to continue to pay. So if a customer chooses to leave PG&E retail service and come here to a CCA, that dollar amount follows them. So if I were to just go out and simply procure, yeah, my price would be cheaper. Yes, the cost would be, but no, we have to pay that departing load. And sometimes that amount, this is the perverse, it's a very complex process, but as market prices decrease for the cost of energy, that delta, the above market price, increases. So that line item on the bill goes up. And that's now explicitly on all of the bills. But I think my point to everyone here is that you have choices. You can opt out, you can see on this rate comparison. There's also annual joint rate mailers that go to all customers that not only lay out the last 12 months of billing and all of the different components of that, but also the power content. Because I think one of you here asked that question about, is it 100% renewable? Is it how much gas is in there? Well, all of that is also provided as a comparison.
So I think you said in order for the CCA to exist, it has to be part of the IOU. Is that correct? So
in the IOU territory, yes.
Okay, yeah, IOU territory. Okay, so now the IOU is one of their issues they brought up is they have all these programs that have been mandated by the PUC, sorry.
Right.
And so let's say I'm a customer, I'm part of PG&E, I now go with one of your CCAs. Who pays that? Does that also come with me?
Such a great question. Such a great question.
Yeah, so my concern is that it stays with PG&E and now it has to be spread over fewer customers. So
yeah, no, what it is, so let's say like there's energy efficiency programs that are authorized by the CPUC. The CCA can decide, do I want to have my own energy efficiency program? Do I not have any program because I don't have the money for it and I've got to really focus, I'm just starting off? Or am I going to go and apply to the CPUC to have a CPUC authorized energy efficiency program? Therefore, that will be regulated by them. Some have done both. What the CCAs do have to do, though, is absolutely take care of their low-income communities. So CARE and FARA, we have very targeted programs for that. In fact, I would say, again, going back to big picture, what are the priorities for CCAs? Affordability, absolutely. It's also reliability, decarbonization, and equity. It's a huge part. So when I look at a lot of the programs that have been designed, it's specifically to address that equity issue, and including on-bill credits, return of, because we don't have private shareholders, right? The communities are our shareholders. So sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you. So let me go to Commissioner Garcetti, to be followed by Commissioner Hernandez.
Ms. Vaughan, thank you so much for being here. It's a particular joy to have your presence, someone who seems to really enjoy being here and sharing your expertise with us, some of us who have little expertise in this field. So thank you. Now, I'm assuming that your board or your boss, whatever it might be, set some goals for you for this coming year and maybe for 2 or 3 years. If you would like to, and I'm just going to offer to you in that fashion, share those goals with us. And lastly, you know how we function. We listen to experts like you. We discuss with our staff, the information we perhaps didn't have before we come to our duty of making recommendations. What recommendation or recommendations would you love to see us have for your type of organization that would make your job easier and perhaps help you reach the goals that you have?
Wow. Okay. So one, yes, I do actually really enjoy the work I do, and it's an honor to be able to do it. I feel like it's a culmination of my career. I'll tell you, goals for me have evolved over time. And in particular, when I came in 2017 and was asked to start up an association from the ground up, to be honest with you, I'm surprised that they kept me. Because I felt like I was the school teacher, saying with great market share comes great responsibility. And one of the first things we have to do is ensure the viability. You can't just have white hat, black hat. It's not like that. Oh, we're awesome. Aren't we great? Look at all the cool things we can do. As Commissioner Hernandez knows, he has kept our feet to the fire in terms of supplier diversity, right? You and I, Jose, have had many conversations about that. And I'm glad to report that our supplier diversity programs, we're now getting some gold stars. It's still a struggle. We're still working on it. But even this week, we have a Certify and Amplify going on in South San Francisco to get more diverse suppliers. So we have evolved, but so to your question, Commissioner Garcetti, on the one hand, I have now CCAs that have been around for a long time, and I've got 10 that have stellar credit ratings, much better than the investor-owned utilities. I have new CCAs that have launched in Southern California. So we go from the top, Humboldt County, all the way down to San Diego Gas and Electric into the San Diego County. And those new ones probably need our help. We learned a lot from, we had one CCA fail, right? Western Community Energy down in Riverside. We're upfront about that. We learned a lot of lessons. Out of that came our model practices guide. If you're going to be part of an association, which they all are, you've got to follow these best practices. So for me right now, I think the biggest concern for my board is this question of cost and affordability. I would say, for example, back in August of 2000 and 2022, when we had those rolling blackouts, it was all about reliability. And it was, Beth, how do we get our projects online, delivering on time? How do we get out of having to purchase short-term resource adequacy and have the stability of these long-term contracts? How do we, for instance, not follow, was it PG&E told you about 6 different rate changes? That's one of our goals, is we don't want to keep, our customers don't want that. So now I have, with my more mature CCAs, rate stabilization funds where they don't peg themselves to the IOU and go back and forth. So for me, yeah, I think it's in our rate reduction tools. One of the things for me, I think, is work on, Derek talked about the regional energy market, because I see that as being a rate reduction tool. And I know that's a controversial issue, but we have for 2 years been participating and educating ourselves on a regional market. CCAs schedule 1/3 of the load into the independent system operator. Again, I don't think a lot of people know this, So how do we make sure that we have access to the resources that we need in both in terms of our procurement and in times of extreme weather situations? Yeah, I could go on, but and I have some of that in my presentation, but I see those at the moment as being a real big concern, and we are in the process. The power charge and difference adjustment is the bane of my existence. We are in yet another proceeding on that, began this year, and we're told it's going to go on for 3 years at the Public Utilities Commission, and that just creates regulatory uncertainty and market uncertainty.
Yep. Good.
So
Thank you.
Commissioner Hernandez. Let me just say, Jose, every meeting we find out how many irons you have and how many different fires. And I hope I don't really want to know, but
So,
thank you for being on the commission. Commissioner Hernandez.
Just a quick question in terms of why the PUC created the power charge indifference adjustment.
Well, it actually began before CCAs. It was back when direct access was created, right? So for folks that don't know, and that was part of the energy crisis, it came out of 1996 with the restructuring of the energy sector, going to more retail choice, like the Texas market, and energy service providers are able to do direct access, provide where it's not through the investor-owned utility. Now, energy service providers are also regulated by the CPUC, just like us. But there was market manipulation basically back then. But the point being, if you left the utility retail energy or bundled service and you went to direct access, it was only fair that if that utility had purchased energy for the next 20 years for that customer, that customer should have to continue to pay that. So that's the essence of it.
I guess I know it because I've been doing it, but I mean,
okay.
Exit fee. I mean, I think it's relevant because we're talking about NEM. And so, I mean, I remember the CPC study that showed that if a large portion of customers went towards CCAs, the remaining customers would pay more. Was that kind of
Yes, you're right. And that's exactly, we take those costs with us. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that it's the calculation is based on market price benchmarks of resource adequacy, of RPS, of brown power, natural gas. And if you have volatility in those markets, that flows back through and we can't control it, right? We have no control over that. So it's simply a price that we have to take, and it can really tip our rates. I'll tell you, that's the governing boards of CCAs, it's the biggest frustration. So we're not arguing that we shouldn't have to pay it. We should. It's just how it's calculated and what that can do to utility bills.
Thank you.
Shall I'll keep going. I'll go pretty quickly. Please. If you pop it back up there, let's go to slide 4, the next slide. Because this plays into what I guess where I'm headed is, when I first came on, right, I said back in 2010, there was only MCE launched, but now look at the number of communities, over 200 communities we serve, 36% of the counties, 42% of the cities. Next slide, please. And this is like a flat map, which I think you'll find interesting because of the conversation you were having between urban and rural, right, and the different pressures. So yes, again, we can only form in the investor-owned utility territory. So you see that green, that's where we are serving customers. In orange is where implementation plans are filed, where a date has been set that those customers will become CCA customers. And then blue is where you're considering CCA. Well, you're seeing a lot of orange here because a lot has been happening. So let me explain that. On the right-hand side, you see the timeline, where I said, 2010 MCE launched. 2018 is my baby boomer year, where 2018 launched. I'm sorry, 10 launched in 2018. And then have a look at the bottom there. 2022, the very last community choice aggregator to form was in the city of Palmdale. That's Epic is their logo there. But that doesn't really tell the story of what's going on. What's happening is existing CCAs are expanding. So the load that we serve continually becomes greater. And some examples of that is what you're seeing with the orange. So AVA, its name used to be East Bay Community Energy, and last year they changed it to AVA, which is they started in Alameda County. So Alameda to the Valley is basically what I think the interpretation is. And so next year, I believe they have they started serving the city of Stockton this year, and then Vice Chair Canella, they're coming over to your area there, where they're going to be serving the county of San Joaquin, just above Turlock. So there has been this expansion out into the Central Valley. The other is the ones that you see in the north, the orange, that's Pioneer Community Energy, started with Placer County, added El Dorado. And in 2027, they're going to expand into 13 new territories, 7 cities, and 5 more counties. And they're going to double their load. Their footprint will be bigger. They're going to double their load. But back to the question about what priorities are. Those guys have different priorities than, say, the city of San Jose. City of San Jose is facing data center growth. Those folks up there are facing the threat of wildfires and wanting to do things like build more biomass plants, right? And deal with wildfire mitigation issues. Okay, just the last thing I'll just say at the bottom there is a link to our website. We've not quite given up on this map, but things have become so complex. We have an amazing interactive map now on our website that you can go to, put in an address, find out who your retail energy provider is, but it also contains all of our projects, all of our power projects, transmission lines, distribution lines, all that kind of stuff. Okay, next slide. This is the one that I think you'll be interested in. 15 years ago, in 2010, that only had 3 slices. All right, there were no CCAs. And so back then, when I was in the business, I was representing the cogeneration projects in California. The IOUs would be maybe 70 to 75% of that pie slice. Publicly owned utilities still around 25, and direct access maybe 15%. But look at this redistribution. And then you can drill this down into like PG&E's territory, for instance. And this is really interesting when we're looking at data center growth, because a lot of it's targeted in the PG&E area. And if we're the default provider, you have in PG&E's territory, those numbers change so that there's no publicly owned utility, you take that out, but we serve 46% of the retail load, PG&E 39%, and direct access is 15%. So I think someone made the point, I think actually Commissioner Hernandez, that this is the IPER forecast. So that's the California Energy Commission. They do this forecast in December of 2024, forecasting out, and he's correct. Nobody thinks this is right, that there's a lot more coming. We've been relatively flat for many, many years, but there's some great challenges coming. And also with electrification, if we're truly going to electrify our transportation and building sectors, there'll be a more gradual increase in load, but definitely growth of data centers. Okay, next slide. And I only have 3 slides left. So this slide, I just wanted to, since our primary job is the procurement of energy for our customers, I wanted to share with you our progress and how that impacts the state goals. So under Senate Bill 350, starting in 2021, at least 65% of RPS procurement must be from long-term contracts of 10 years or more. So starting back in 2018, annually, we collect the data from our CCAs and we publish it on our website. And it's, again, because we're local government, it's transparent, it's accessible. You can see there where we've got maps of where the projects are, the color coding in that graphic tells you the diversity. Someone asked Derek, I think, about, what are you procuring? Is it just solar and wind? What you're seeing there with those different colors is no, we're going a lot more diverse, a lot more solar plus storage, geothermal, because we have a requirement by the CPUC for long lead time resources. We also have biomass in there. So that's the new build. This is specifically about new build. And you see again, this is out of date because it was last November, but the billions of dollars that are being injected into or being committed by us to build and operate this. The other thing I was going to talk about, but we already did, was the transparency point about the rate comparisons and the power content labels. We actually do our own analysis when we get the power content information from the Energy Commission, and we line up the IOUs, the POUs, and the CCAs. And sometimes our CCAs don't like it because we can see who's doing well and who's not. But it changes every year. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So this is what I really wanted to I suspect you want to talk about, is factors impacting affordability. And then I want to talk about rate reduction tools. So I'm just going to speak to the generation side of the bill, not the transmission distribution, which, as you've all heard, that's where the dramatic cost increases are. But the generation side is still very important, as Derek mentioned, and these are the things that keep me up at night. Resource adequacy or capacity is something that has been going up, and we've been tracking this because we have these compliance obligations, and we have really big penalties if we don't comply. And we started several years ago during COVID raising the alarm about this increasing price that we're seeing. And what it is there's scarcity in the market, changing rules in the regulatory uncertainty where now you couldn't import as much RA as before. And also, if you don't get those bigger new build projects online on time with their RA, the capacity component, that means we're out in the short-term market paying these crazy prices. So and the other thing I just want to mention is there's scarcity across the West. It's not just California, and we can't forget that we are competing with all those other Western states. All right, regulatory uncertainty. Okay, it's something you hear, but the rules are constantly changing. And this impacts the value of my power procurement agreement, right? If I sign and execute an agreement in 2020 under a certain set of rules, and then those rules change, that impacts the value of my contract and whether it's been devalued and I have to go out and purchase more. Right now, the PPAs are negotiated based on compliance rules specifically around integrated resource planning, RPS, resource adequacy. Just this week, lots of stakeholders. We were at the CPUC with a lot of other stakeholders in a workshop trying to figure out a new regulatory framework called the Reliable and Clean Power Procurement Program. RCPPP is the acronym. And the goal is to collapse the RA, IRP, and RPS programs into one to improve the process for load-serving entities to procure their share of the resources needed to meet electric system reliability and greenhouse gas emissions goals at least cost. I totally agree with that. I agree with what the purpose is and the mission, but there will be winners and losers, right? People have executed contracts for the next 20, 30 years based on the old rules. So when you change those rules, who ultimately pays? It's going to be our customers, right? IOU customers, my customers, at the end of the day. Okay, the next thing is procurement uncertainty, which I've labeled procurement and deliverability barriers there. So something I haven't heard anyone talk about yet, but in COVID, remember, it resulted in these supply chain disruptions. And I would argue that not all of that's gone away, right? It was really in August of 2020 in that heat wave and the rotating outages that we were asked by the governor's office to start tracking program delivery dates and making sure if we saw something being delayed that we were working with them to, they were helping us, with accelerating, if they could, any sorts of problems. What's happening now is, for instance, there's been some presentations. We're at an ISO Summer Outlook, 2025 Summer Outlook, where a fellow from the WEC, that's the Western Energy Coordinating Council, represents 14 Western states, was showing us the delay times for transformers, circuit breakers, things that you need to interconnect. So we could build this project, but then it's isolated. It can't interconnect onto the queue and actually get the delivery of the power to the people. So these things are very, very, very concerning, and it could be more than 4 years, the delivery date delay, and the costs are doubling. Okay, so now add on to that what Derek was talking about with the changes at the federal level, the loss of investment tax credits, uncertainty of tariffs. What are the risks and who carries it, right? We've tried to execute PPAs where we push the risk onto the developer. Well, the developer is not going to play that game. So Clean Power Alliance, for instance, put an RFO out in May, asking as part of it, what sort of terms and conditions should we be considering to share the risks of uncertainty between us? So that's something that impacts us. Lack of ratepayer protections. I think I was in a moment where I worry about lack of ratepayer protections, but you know, the CPUC charter is to protect the investor-owned utility ratepayers, has certain perspective when considering cost shifts. But what I wanted to say is that when you're in a proceeding at the PUC, and CalCCA leads over 50 proceedings for our CCAs, we try to organize, like it is very litigious. You have, you know, in terms of the ratepayers, the Cal Advocates, the Utility Reform Network, the IOUs in terms of their eye on their customer while also having to have a rate of return to their shareholders. But a written record is relied upon, so you've got to be in there, you've got to intervene, you've got to participate, and it is expensive. And sometimes I wonder who's really thinking about the ratepayer, who's really concerned about the customers. The other thing you all talked about was general rate cases. We're involved in all of those, as well as the Energy Resource Recovery Account proceedings. They're incredibly important, but they're super complex, they're really dry, and they're very detailed. And so I'm not sure, you know, every year we're involved, and every year we find errors in calculations. We find savings for the ratepayers because that's where the power charge and difference adjustment is influenced by all of those different mechanisms. And then finally, I just want to touch on the load growth. Like I said, it's been really flat, but one thing you didn't hear from PG&E, but I was in a panel with a PG&E rep last week or the week before, where they showed a slide where, based on applications for interconnection, they think there might be 14 gigawatts at the transmission level interconnection of data center growth. So that's kind of stunning. So to the question, I think was it Commissioner Garcetti, I believe there's a roundtable today up in Sacramento that Stanford's organized with various players to talk about this question. Because to your point, I do not believe there has been enough discourse about this and what's real and what isn't. So back to ratepayer protections, got to make sure there's no cost shifts. How do we do that? Well, there's some different examples of types of contracts, especially through direct access, right? Take or pay type contracts. My one plea to everybody would be, don't let the power charge and difference adjustment get involved in this. Whereas Jose, no exit fee can be impacted by this. We want the ratepayer protected, the residential ratepayer and the other commercial industrial. Okay, the final slide I have for you, if we pop that up, is just rate reduction tools. And you've heard a lot about the two at the bottom. I'm going to focus on the four at the top. Both John Kennedy in the first hearing from the RCR, the rural county representatives, and then also Derek talked about this ability to do municipal, tax-exempt, low-interest municipal bonds. We've jumped on this. So in 2021, 5 community choice aggregators founded the California Community Choice Financing Authority. It's a joint powers authority, public meetings. It was established with the goal to reduce the cost of power purchases for member CCAs through prepayment structures. Started with 5, there's now 12 involved in this. And in just 4 years, the Financing Authority has issued 19 billion, including one that was issued by MCE this week. So 19 billion in tax-exempt prepayment revenue bonds for its CCA members. It has up to a 10% or more savings on power purchase agreements. That 19 billion equates to savings of over 120 million per year in the cost of renewable energy for those member CCAs. And that equates to $3.8 billion savings over the life of the transactions. So you want a tool? That's a tool with real numbers, with real results. Okay, now I go to the leveraging what we've learned from that. I have some CCAs who want to now apply kind of lessons learned. It's not exactly the same financing tool at all, but apply it to the public financing of transmission projects and essentially be a public-private partnership. I don't know if you've heard about it, but Cal Advocates published an analysis last year estimating the potential for $28 billion in ratepayer savings over the coming decades if California California's transmission infrastructure is financed with public investment. Berkeley Law had another report out last October, and it's led to some bills in the legislature right now. So Senator Padilla has SB 330, which would pilot some of these projects. And I believe there's some provisions now in the Assembly Bill of Affordability Bill, AB 825. So we are in conversations with the authors. We're looking at this. And again, it's a partnership. So Commissioner Cannella, we're ready to put our money where our mouth is here on some of the wire stuff, if they'll let us. So the other thing then is regional energy markets. And I know that Derek spoke to this and I spoke a little bit to this, but again, what I'm really proud of with our CCAs is my board became involved in trying to understand this after the last regionalization bill failed. And we've spent over 2 years analyzing this, became very involved with the Pathways Initiative. We're on the committee there. I actually co-hosted with Cal Environment Advocates a public webinar on this topic to kind of tease out. There's a lot of controversy, I get it, but honestly, from our perspective, there are clear benefits, enhanced reliability. As I said, the geographic and weather diversity, it's really important. There's cost savings through more efficient dispatch, ability to do better renewable integration, and we've identified and agree with the environmental benefits that have been identified by the Brattle Group and the Stanford studies that have been going on. So it's a controversial issue. I get it. I'm not sure that we completely agree with Senate Bill 540 in its current form. I also completely understand the concern folks have with the impact by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on this. But we think it's probably, if this came to be, and we could create a regional energy market without all the seams issues that we have now, then it would be a huge cost savings in the long run. My concern is, what if we don't, right? A lot of people have said to me, well, can't we just do nothing? Well, the rest of the West is organizing in the Southern Power Pool, Markets Plus. And that we have many players in the current energy imbalance market, and we are expecting to be part of EDAM, our day ahead market that's being set up. If those folks leave and they go off to that market, we will lose some of our economic and environmental benefits that we already have. And so the question is, at what cost? And then also there is a Western Regional Resource Adequacy Program. It's called RAP is the acronym, and they are setting up under the Southern Power Pool. So folks that we've relied upon in heat waves before for that capacity aren't going to be there. And so that's one of my biggest fears. It's kind of the what if we don't. And then on the final on the right, and I know it's small, but I'm going to put it out there because you're asking for ideas. As I mentioned, resource adequacy has been really expensive. It's incredibly expensive, and the penalties for not meeting it is expensive. And who pays? It's the customer. Well, previously, so prior to this year of 2025, load-serving entities were required to meet a monthly resource adequacy obligation using resources accredited with a monthly RA contribution. It was a calculation. Now in 2025, we're in what's called the slice of day framework, which I also don't object to because it's more granular. So load-serving entities, our obligations are based on 24 hours of the peak day in each month, okay? And we have to show resources sufficient to meet those load obligations in each hour. Makes sense, right? 3 in the morning, it's not coming from wind or solar, right? What's it coming from? But the problem, our issue is that you have an obligation that's hourly compliance. Well, why can't we meet that with trading? And so what I want to explain is that there's a mismatch, right? If our portfolio is limited to transacting product for the whole month, even though obligations are unique to the hour, then that means we're going to have to go out and buy more. So you have to buy something from a geothermal facility. You can't sell the excess right now. You have to purchase the entire product. It creates artificial market scarcity. So anyways, long-winded way to say is we've studied this at depth in detail. We've done modeling. It's been peer reviewed. We've proposed it to the CPUC, I think, for the last 3 years. We have a detailed white paper, and our analysis shows that load serving entities could have avoided 105 million in purchases of excess RA resources just for the summer, for the 4 months of the summer. And that would put a downward pressure on RA prices and potentially reduce RA costs of an additional 77 million per year. So again, I know I'm very dry and very detailed here, but it's kind of like a no-brainer to us. And this goes back to somebody's question about the CPUC. And I noticed Severin, I'm going to agree with Dr. Bornstein on this in your first hearing. I do think they're understaffed and under-resourced. My only way of, like, why they're not embracing this is because I don't think they have the staff to implement it. I don't have a big staff, but we were able to create the modeling. We were able to automate this and do proof of concept. But I just worry that they're lagging our commissions. You know, they have really good people, really good mind, but I also where I have a bunch of them now at the CCAs, as well as IOU, former IOU staff with me. But I do worry about that. Anyways, despite our common sense approach, 2 weeks ago, the CPUC rejected us again in a proposed decision. So now we're going to head to the legislature and see what we can do there. Anyways, I'm sorry that got very boring. You can bring down the slides. I included one slide in the appendix there for folks on local CCA programs. As I said, the goal with all of those is to lower costs, particularly for low-income customers, increase reliability, that kind of thing. So I'll stop. I'm sorry, I could go on forever.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Look, I'm in Santa Barbara, so I joined the CCA. So I get my energy through that choice. And so
Nice.
I greatly appreciate your presentation. I see no further questions or comments from commissioners. I want to thank you for your testimony. That concludes this part of our meeting. And let me turn it back over to, I think, probably Ethan, because we are now going to look at public comment.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. We'll now go to the public comment session of the meeting. If the staff can put up the instructions for public comment. If you have joined via Zoom, just raise your hand if you want to make public comment. If you have phoned in, you may email us, but do so immediately at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. That address is on the screen. Give us your phone number so we know who to unmute. But the easier way is simply raise your hand if you have joined via Zoom. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you when you make public comment. There's no one in the physical location who wishes to make public comment, so I will ask Shara to identify the first speaker.
Our first.
Oops, lost you. I can't hear Shara.
No.
I see there's a Peter Spadia, but I don't hear.
Peter Spadia, you now have the ability to unmute yourself.
There you go. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name is Peter Spadia. I live in Walnut Creek. I'd like to talk about, I guess, PG&E and PUC mitigation plans for people that are experiencing power outages due to PSPSs and also being on enhanced circuits, you know, the EPSS circuits. So since 2020, my neighborhood and my house have experienced 10 power outages annually. In 2024, we experienced 12 outages, one being the PSPS that lasted over 24 hours. My house and neighborhood, which is approximately 100 houses, was put on ESPS circuit approximately 2021, 22. I've had several conversations with PG&E regarding these outages. While PG&E reps have expressed empathy for our situations, they have not provided any specific information on when PG&E can improve these outages or when they can give me reliable power. However, PG&E has referred me to programs to assist customers who are in high fire threat areas and who are supplied power by EPSS circuits. I'd like to bring attention to the committee that these programs are wholly inadequate to mitigate up to 12 power outages a year, the majority of which occur between July and November. Furthermore, I'd like to point out that one of the programs, the SGIP program, is advertised as a program that can offset the majority of installation costs of battery storage for PG&E customers who are on EPSS circuits and who are in high fire threat areas. The fact, after researching this, is the SGIP program's overriding goal is to improve energy efficiency for low-income households. It is not designed for homeowners who have lost basic utility reliability as a way for PG&E to mitigate its risk of starting wildfire conflagrations. PG&E and the CPUC should not be claiming that the SGIP program is a mitigation measure to support utility customers dealing with PSPSs or ESPS outages. In fact, there's a report, the 2023 SGIP Program Performance and Process Evaluation Report that was published in June of 2024, notes the following about the SGIP program, and I quote, "The SGIP program was originally conceived as a program to provide incentives for installing large generation and solar PV technology, yet these only account for 3% of SGIP projects. Since 2017, small residential projects account for 62% of applications submitted, but each project is only 1% of the average generation project capacity. This implies the current SGIP program application process is out of scale with the current program. Furthermore, the program is completely failing in its stated goals of supporting underserved communities and low-income families. The report notes, and again, I quote, "The residential storage projects account for 90% of applications."
So your 3 minutes has expired. If you can wrap up very quickly, please.
Yeah, basically, I don't think that the SGIP program or any program that PG&E or the PUC is using for mitigation they're wholly inadequate for people that are becoming islands of unreliability due to PSPSs and telemetry-driven circuits. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sheriff, we can go to the next speaker.
Our next speaker is going to be M. De Bernardo. You now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Mario DiBernardo. I am the Government Affairs Director for the Southern California Public Power Authority. We're a joint power authority that consists of 12 member utilities. They are publicly owned utilities in Southern California, 11 cities, and 1 irrigation district. One of our specialties is procuring resources, renewable resources for our membership. And one of the things I'd like to highlight is that it's been well documented, and I'd be happy to send staff some background information, but Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has excellent resources in terms of what's going on currently in the energy market, and we are experiencing this firsthand. As a public agency, we issue RFPs for proposals, and we have seen significant declines in the proposals for renewable and storage projects compared to years before the pandemic. And this is due to the significant supply and demand imbalance that we're seeing in the market. Demand is increasing. Our members have aggressive renewable energy goals. The state has its mandates to increase renewable procurement. And then, previously to the CCAs, we were in the market 40 plus POUs with 3 IOUs also participating in the market. Today, we have over 20 CCAs that have been added to the market that we're all competing with for resources. So there's been an increase in demand as a result. We are also seeing corporations with sustainability goals join the market. And we have the data centers that are adding to the demand as well. On the supply side, it's been well documented that we've had issues getting new resources online. These are issues beyond publicly owned utilities control. It's no secret that it is taking years for projects to come on to get the interconnection approvals in the Cal ISO. We also have land use and permit issues that at the local level where projects are installed that are creating delays. And then, as the CCA representative mentioned, supply chain has really affected the market as well. And those are the supply chain uncertainty is only increasing, right? With tariffs, inflation, we're seeing those challenges. So these are all having a direct effect on the cost of resources, the cost specifically of new resources. We've seen solar and wind double in the last 5 years. And then lastly, I just want to mention that at the federal level with the big beautiful bill, the tax bill, there is a significant effort to phase out federal clean energy tax incentives that cover 30 to 50% of the costs of a project. And if those are phased out, those are costs that will be shifted to customers. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Sheriff, we can go to the next speaker.
Our next speaker will be Rocky Fernandez. You now have the ability to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. My name is Rocky Fernandez, Senior Policy Director with the Center for Sustainable Energy. Our mission is decarbonize, and we believe this can be done affordably. We very much appreciate the report. Wanted to make sure that the final report accurately describes some of the programs we help administer. I'd like the Commission to know that the Self-Generation Incentive Program, or SGIP, mentioned in Appendix A on page 30, transitioned just last month from a ratepayer-funded program to a general fund program via Assembly Bill 209. Also, the Solar and Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, SOMA, is not ratepayer funded as described on page 23. It's funded through investor-owned utilities cap and trade funds, the same source as the residential and small business climate credits. 15% by law is set aside for programs that support socioeconomic equity in our cap and trade programs. SOMA actually creates an equity-focused monthly climate credit for those who live in multifamily affordable housing that reduces bills by 39 to 61% every single month. That means $40 to $60 off of a family's bill monthly. Per program evaluation, SOMA creates a negative cost shift from the ratepayer-funded CARE program mentioned in the draft by $7.1 million total over the life of the program, and will relieve that program by $2.6 million alone in 2025. Finally, the Commission should know that SOMA collections end in June of 2026. So there'll be more money to help out ratepayers once that ends. We appreciate the report and thank you for the time and attention to these issues.
Thank you very much. I believe that is our final speaker, and we've received no emails. So, Mr. Chairman, we've concluded the public comment portion of the meeting, so we can adjourn as we've concluded the agenda. I'll just mention the next meeting of the Commission is this Tuesday, the 1st at 10 a.m. via Zoom for a business meeting on various topics, including selection of future study topics. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you once again. Thank you to staff for extraordinary work leading up to this, and I want to thank the commissioners for their participation. Right, whoever's traveling, have safe travels, and we'll see you again for the next meeting. Thanks, everybody.